and they'll. Good afternoon once again, and thank you for your interest and participation in the CSDE IEP preview series. My name is Brian Klimkowitz. I'm the Special Education Division Director, and on behalf of the CSDE, I'd like to welcome you to our session this afternoon, whether you're participating live or viewing this recording at a later date and time. Excuse me. The CSD is committed to improving the quality of IEPs and the special education process, and we are in the midst of a historic statewide special education improvement effort. The foundation for this goal is a transition to our statewide Connecticut Special Education Data System, or CT-SEDS. A tremendous amount of strategic planning and collaboration has resulted in a multifaceted system of training and technical assistance designed to support our educators, parents, and other interested community members and stakeholders. We're very proud to provide you with an opportunity to participate in our IEP quality training series, as well as our CT-SEDS navigation training, which is very soon to be released this summer. We know that change is difficult, but any effort that will benefit our students with disabilities across the state is a journey worth taking. And I want to thank you all who have embraced these new opportunities, and thank you for your partnership and support during this exciting time. We know this initiative will be successful because of you all. So today is our 10th session in our series designed to preview and highlight the various components of the IEP process within CT-SEDS. As you know, our sessions take place on Monday afternoons from 4 p.m. till 5 p.m. and can be accessed using the same Zoom link for each session. We'll go ahead and put that link in the chat box. And today we're excited for our focus area, which is district and state assessment. Our commitment to you is to do our best to start and end on time. And these sessions are recorded for future viewing and posted on the new IEP website, which we'll also include in the link for you. The structure of today's session will include a brief presentation, followed by a question and answer session. And joining me today and facilitating our discussion is Deidre Ducharme, an education consultant in the Bureau of Student Assessment. And of course, Steve Profit and the CERC team, Craig Struble, would like to thank you for your facilitation and support of all of these sessions. And as mentioned, if you're not able to tune in live, on our website, we do post our recordings as well as our slide decks that we use. Our goal for today's session is to provide a high-level overview of the assessment section of CT-SEDS. And the presentation is designed to give you a sense of how the system operates. It's not meant to be a comprehensive training. It'll also be impossible to do a walkthrough of those various sessions and scenarios. So these are not meant to replace our formal training, which is coming in the near future. Due to the format of our presentation, participants are unable to unmute. However, we do encourage you to ask questions via the Q&A panel. If you have a question at any time during our session, please utilize that panel, which you can find on the bottom of your screen next to the chat button. Please don't enter questions into the chat, as the presenters may not see them or notice them, but we are saving any and all questions that are typed in live, and we do review those and will answer any questions at a later time, which help us inform future training and resources. So thank you for your questions in advance. Once again, these sessions are not designed to replace IEP quality or CT-SEDS navigation, but rather to support and supplement you in assisting your current transition from your current system to CT-SEDS on July 1, 2022. So without further ado at this time, I would like to turn the presentation over to Deidre, and thanks once again, Deidre, for your presence and participation and your expertise.
Great, thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start today by reviewing the different statewide assessments administered in Connecticut. We offer the English Language Proficiency Assessment for students in grades K through 12 who are identified as English learners. The Smarter Balanced Assessments in English Language Arts and Mathematics for students in grades 3 through 8. And the Connecticut SAT School Day for students enrolled in grade 11. We also administer the Next Generation Science Standards NGSS assessment for students enrolled in grades 5, 8, and 11. And finally, we offer the Connecticut alternate assessments for math and English language arts to students in grades 3 through 8 and 11, and the alternate science assessment, CTAS, to students enrolled in grades 5, 8, and 11. These alternate assessments are intended for students who have significant cognitive disabilities and for whom the standard assessments would not be appropriate. Here, we see a screenshot of page 9 of our current IEP. This is where PPTs currently record the district-wide and statewide assessment information for our students. Here is an example of what the assessment section will look like on the new IEP document. For the purposes of today's demonstration, we'll be using a 5th grade student who has been identified as an English learner. You can see that the student will be taking the English Language Proficiency Assessment without accommodations, and will also be participating in the STAR Reading and STAR Math district assessments, also without designated supports or accommodations. This next slide shows the remaining assessment information from the student's IEP. The student will be participating in the Smarter Balanced math assessment with the accommodation of a multiplication table. The student will also be participating in the Smarter Balanced ELA assessment, but without accommodations. Since this is a 5th grade student, the IEP also includes information about the Next Generation Science Standards assessment. As you can see from these 2 slides, only the information that is relevant to the individual student and is entered into the system will be printing on the IEP document. This makes the information much clearer and easier to understand than the current IEP forms. Now that you've seen what this section looks like on the new IEP, let's see how this information is entered into the CT-SEDS system. We'll start at the landing page for the IEP module. The green arrow is pointing to the tile the user would select to enter district and state assessment information for the student. Once the tile is selected, the user is brought to the district and state testing information page of the IEP development process. As you can see here, the first panel, indicated by the gold star, is simply informational and reminds the user that any accommodations selected for assessments should also appear in the Supplementary Aids and Services section of the IEP and be used with the student during instruction. The red arrow is pointing to the district-wide assessment panel. The user will need to select the student's level of participation from a drop-down menu indicated by the green arrow. The drop-down menu options appear at the bottom of the slide and include no district-wide assessments, participation in standard district assessments, and participation in alternate district assessments. Once a student's participation level is selected, indicated here by the red arrow, the user will type in the name of the district assessments. The green arrow is showing that the STAR Reading and STAR Math were entered. The next step is to use a drop-down to select the student's participation level. The drop-down options are shown at the bottom of the slide. The two options are simply with or without designated supports or accommodations. If the student requires designated supports and/or accommodations on the district assessment, a text box will appear, indicated here by the green arrow, and the user can record the specific supports or accommodations that the student will use while taking the assessment. The next panel on the assessment page is the statewide assessment information. At the top of the panel are directions for the user, indicated here with the gold star. The user will first select the grade the student will be in during the assessment window. The two choices will always be the student's current grade and the next grade. The English learner question, shown here by the green arrow, is pre-populated from the information on the student information page, and the user will just need to confirm that it is accurate. The last item on this panel, shown by the blue arrow, is to indicate whether or not the student is being considered for participation in the alternate assessment system. Once the information is entered, the user will click the green Save button. This next slide shows the next panel on the assessment page. Once again, the gold star is indicating that there is information for the user at the top of the page. The red arrow is showing that the system knows that the student will need to participate in the ELP assessment because they have been identified as an English learner. What the user will need to do is select the participation level. Here, we see that the student will not receive accommodations on the ELP assessment. The green arrow is pointing to the Smarter Balanced assessment information. Using the previous information provided by the user, the system knows that the student will be taking the grade 5 standard assessments. Similar to the ELP assessment, the user will need to provide the participation level for the Smarter Balanced Math and ELA assessments. And finally, the blue arrow is showing that the system already knows that the student will be participating in the 5th grade science assessment. So let's take a look at how designated supports and accommodations are added. This slide shows that the user has selected that the student will be using accommodations for the math assessment, indicated here by the red arrow. Once that is selected, the green Add Designated Supports and Accommodations button will appear. After the user clicks the green button, the Add Edit Designated Supports and Accommodation modal will open. This screenshot is showing the top portion of the list the user can select from. As you can see on the right, there is a scroll bar that shows the other options further down the list. And here is the very bottom of the list. The red arrow is showing that if a student needs special documented accommodations, the user would check that box. A special documented accommodation is an accommodation that requires additional verification or documentation prior to the approval. Examples include the use of a calculator for students in grades 6 through 8, math manipulatives, a human signer or visual support, and scribe. Once the box is checked, the modal expands in guidance information, additional choices, and the required attestation statement checkboxes appear. On this slide, the red arrow shows that the user has selected that the student will use accommodations for the Smarter Balanced Math assessment. The green arrow is pointing to the accommodations that was selected from the accommodations modal. If more than one accommodation was selected, they would also appear here. Finally, the blue arrow is showing that the student will not receive accommodations for the ELA assessment. If the student is receiving accommodations, a required checkbox will appear at the bottom of the assessment page. By checking that box, the user is confirming that the student will receive equivalent accommodations during instruction. So now that we've run through the process, I'd like to talk about the alternate assessments and the alternate assessment eligibility form. On the first statewide assessment panel, where the user indicates the grade the student will be in during the assessment window, there is a question you see here. Is the student being considered for participation in the Connecticut alternate assessment system? If the user selects yes, the alternate assessment eligibility panel will appear. Here, we see by the red arrow that the student's primary disability is pre-populated by the system. The eligibility criteria for participation in the alternate assessments is also displayed. As a reminder, a student qualifies for the alternate assessment when the PPT determines that the student has an intellectual impairment, adaptive behavior skills that are well below age level expectations, and the student requires intensive instruction and significant supports. The first of the 3 criteria is that the student has an intellectual impairment. The red arrow is showing that the user has selected that there is no evidence of an intellectual impairment. If this is the case, the student is not eligible and the user is not required to answer questions related to the other 2 criteria. The green arrow is pointing to the statement that appears when this choice is selected, and the blue arrow is pointing to the verification statement the user would need to acknowledge by clicking on the checkbox. For the first 2 criteria, intellectual impairment and adaptive behavior, additional information may be required depending on the option selected. This includes the assessment used, the date of the assessment, and the student's scores. The third criteria requires the user to document whether or not the student requires intensive instruction and significant supports by selecting the appropriate checkbox. After the 3 criteria are addressed, the user will verify the appropriate determination for the alternate assessment eligibility. So now we've seen the process to enter information into the CT SEDS system. So let's take another quick look of how information will appear on a student's IEP using the previous example from the beginning of the presentation. So using our 5th grade English learner who's taking the standard assessments in math and English language arts. Here we see the English language proficiency and district-wide assessment information. And here we see Smarter Balanced Math and English Language Arts information, as well as the Next Generation Science Standard Assessment for the 5th grade student. As a review, the assessment section of CT SEDS captures district and state testing information previously recorded on page 9 of the IEP. The assessment section streamlines the identification of designated supports and accommodations available on statewide assessments previously identified on page 8 of the IEP. Special documented accommodations that historically required a formal request to the Connecticut State Department of Education can now be selected in CT SEDS with the ability to verify attestation statements. And finally, the assessment section contains a built-in eligibility form for students that qualify for the Connecticut Alternate Assessment Systems. This concludes my presentation for you today. We'll stop recording now and I'll turn it over to Brian and Steve to facilitate the Q&A session. Thank you.